Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What happens when you pull your snowblower out for the first time after storing it all summer long? You put some gas in and you find this is going on. Stay tuned, let's take a look at why this is happening. Hey guys, so welcome back to the channel. First off, I'm going to apologize for any background noise. I had to open the garage a little bit and blow a fan because I'm working in here with gas and fumes, and I don't want to stink up the whole house. So I do apologize for that. Second of all, if it's your first time joining me on the channel, thank you. Hope this video helps you. Please consider subscribing. It really helps me out. Or just a simple like would definitely help out as well. So what I'm about to talk about today in this video pertains to leaking fuel systems in your small engines. Now I'm going to be working on this small single stage snowblower, but the principles are going to be pretty much the same for any small carbureted small engine. So the first thing I've done is I've drained out all the fuel from the fuel tank so it wouldn't keep leaking here. This machine does not have a fuel shutoff, a dedicated fuel shutoff. So if yours does, just simply shut off the fuel and that will hopefully cause your leak to stop. Now, and that of course it depends on where it's leaking from. So the main culprit for this particular problem is a needle valve that's in the carburetor of your machine. There's a needle valve in there that is supposed to shut off the fuel with a float system, kind of like the back of your toilet. If that needle valve is not making a nice seal, or it's gummed up and it can't even move, the fuel's just going to keep coming into the carburetor. It's going to overfill, and it's just going to leak out probably the front of the carburetor. And it's just going to keep leaking onto the ground because there's nothing to stop that flow of fuel from coming into the float bowl of the carburetor. That is typically the main culprit for this particular type of problem. Now, of course, you could also have a fuel leak from a fuel line that has cracked. I don't see that very often. Maybe a loose carburetor float bowl. This one's nice and tight. Those are the sort of the main problems. Maybe there's a leak in the gas tank. This one's a metal gas tank, so that's not very likely. So that's why I say the most likely culprit is going to be inside this carburetor right here where the needle valve is. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this float bowl off, and I'm going to, because there is access here on this particular machine, I might be able to just get away with taking the float bowl off, and then I'll be able to tell if the needle valve is stuck or not from there. Okay, so most of these little float bowl nuts are either 10 millimeter or ½ inch. This one happens to be 10 mil. I just have something to catch the excess fuel, whatever's left in the float bowl itself that hasn't leaked out. Just going to let that drain for a little bit. So basically where it's draining from right now is just a loose bowl nut, right? So that could be your culprit. If this bowl nut is loose, that's what you're going to see. And of course, if it's leaking more than it's coming in, it'll never slow down or shut off, right? Alright, so it looks like it's pretty much stopped dripping there, so I'm just going to keep loosening off this bowl nut. bolt, I should say. And then this should usually just fall right down. Okay, so the inside of that, it's got a little bit of rust and corrosion in there. Not the worst I've seen. So here's that float I'm telling you guys about, kind of like the back of your toilet, and the fuel comes in, this float starts to float and it pushes up on a needle valve, which is right in this area right there. I'm not sure if you can see that little silver valve thing right there. So that's supposed to go up and down and shut off the fuel. Now this float bowl might have been stuck. Or sorry, the float itself might have been stuck. So if it's stuck down, then of course that needle valve is not up all the way shutting off the gas. So that could be a problem. A reason for that is either just kind of gummed up, or that this float is actually taking on fuel, which means that it's never going to float. It's going to be sinking down the whole time. So that maybe won't shut off the fuel too. So maybe it's not the needle valve, maybe it's the float assembly itself. So what I'm going to do here is try and get the float pin out. I'm going to hold the float itself, grab the little pin that comes out the side here, pull that out. And the float and the needle should just come straight down. Okay. So I can see a little bit of like junk on the outside of this needle valve. It doesn't take much, guys, for this needle valve to get stuck and then it doesn't go up and down the way it's supposed to. The way you check to see if the float is no good anymore, you just kind of shake it, and if you hear any fluid in there, then you know you have to replace this float because it's been compromised. So that doesn't look like it's the case. So I believe it was just a kind of a gunky, sorry about that, I believe it was just kind of a gunky needle valve that might be causing our issue here. That's what I'm hoping anyways. So what we're going to do for that is that needle valve goes right up into that little brass seat area right there. And sometimes that gets gummed up if it sits for a long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean that out with a Q-tip and some carb cleaner. Just kind of run that up and in there and clean that seat area out as best as I can. And then we'll work on the needle valve itself. Alright guys, so I got my carb spray, I got some Q-tips there, and I'm just going to stick those up in that area. Twist it around as best I can. Spray some right up in there. And I can see just a little bit of gunk in there. If your Q-tip doesn't fit all the way up, you might want to consider like lopping off a little bit of it. Try and get it all the way up and in there, which I think I'm going to have to do. There we go. Right up and in there as best you can. Right up to the end of the area there where the seat is. Okay, so you can't really see it probably on camera. It's not that bad. The other thing we're going to work on here is this needle valve. So the needle valve stays on the float there with this little spring mechanism. So you kind of have to pull down on that spring and then pull it towards the inside of the float. There it comes off. Now be careful not to lose that spring, because that spring does come all the way off. You can see there. So you got to be very careful about cleaning these things. You do not want to get any carb spray on this rubber tip. That rubber tip is susceptible to carb spray, so you kind of have to sort of protect that area maybe, and then kind of wipe this down as best you can with carb spray on maybe at the other end of the Q-tip. Try and get as much of the gunk off of there as possible, because it's a fairly tight fit where this goes, and if there's any sort of buildup or gunk, it just won't shut off the fuel. So I don't know if you're going to see that on camera, but there is a little bit of discoloration on that Q-tip, which indicates that there's definitely some gunk on here. Hopefully that's all it takes to prevent this thing from leaking again. And honestly, from here, I'm just going to put it back together, put my spring back on. I'm going to hold the spring down while I put this back on. This is sometimes hard to do with gloves. Oops. There we go. So it just kind of helps to keep it in place. Now while I have this open, I'm going to shoot a little carb spray up this emulsion tube right here too. It doesn't hurt. There's no real rubber parts up and in there. It just kind of cleans out some of that gunk. Make sure your float is nice and clean as well. Just kind of wipe that. Make sure there's no debris. Float pin ready. Just put that back up. Make sure that the the needle valve goes in there nice and straight. Okay, this looks like it's got a little gunk right here. Definitely a little gunk. Now inside of this thing, try and wipe it out, but if it is really rusty, you could maybe get a little flathead screwdriver, kind of scrape some of that off as best you can. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, guys. Just make sure there's no chunks of debris and stuff in there. You don't want to get that sucked up into the carburetor. Take a little screwdriver and get as much of that debris off as possible. Carb spray in there, wipe that out. Definitely much better. Now with this particular type of float bowl, it doesn't much matter like the orientation. If you have a Tecumseh lawnmower or Tecumseh engine on any of your small equipment, those Tecumseh float bowls have to go on a certain way. So just make sure that's nice and lined up. And I kind of like wiggle it back and forth, make sure it's nice and centered. I do put these float bowls so that the drain plug is accessible. You wouldn't want to put the drain plug in the back. That doesn't make sense. Okay. Make sure it's snug here. If it's loose, it could leak, right guys? So I think we're ready to test this guy out now. Now if this doesn't work, we're going to have to deep dive a little deeper. Maybe take some panels off, see if there's a loose fuel line or something like that. Let me just see if I can see up and in there. Okay, well, we're going to give it a whirl. I'm just going to put a small amount of fuel in there, and hopefully this works. I'm going to take it outside though in case it does leak again. Alright, moment of truth. Start with a little bit. Hopefully just enough to get into the carburetor and fill up the float bowl. Now if this does leak, it should start leaking fairly quickly. It doesn't take long for it to get into the float bowl. So far it's looking good. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Alright, so it's running just the way it's supposed to there. Still no drips. The choke definitely worked because when I turned it on while it was running, it was kind of running rich and choking out. The primer also definitely works because when I hit the primer, you could kind of hear it sputter being too rich as well. So I think we got this one licked, guys. And like I said, this is most likely the cause of your problem. So I would start here. This one happened to be super easy to access, that float bowl and needle valve. So you might have to take it a little bit further apart, but pretty much it's the same for all these small engines. So hopefully you guys got something out of this. Hopefully it helps somebody. And like I say, show me a little love, smash the like button. If you got any further questions or comments, leave them down below. I answer all of those on a weekly basis. So until our next project, guys, take care.